Those words cut through me like a knife. They came from the voice I loved most in the world, my daughter's. In that moment, something inside me cracked. 70 years of love, sacrifice, and sleepless nights raising 2 children suddenly felt like they had evaporated into thin air. My heart didn't just ache, it collapsed, like a house built on years of devotion that no one ever noticed until it was gone. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the recipe notes in my trembling hands, realizing that all my hard work, all the meals I'd planned, and every dollar I'd spent for her wedding banquet had meant nothing. To her, I wasn't a mother. I was free labor, a convenient babysitter in an old woman's body. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you forgot to love yourself? If you have, stay with me until the end of this story. Maybe you'll see a part of your own life in mine. And if you believe no one should ever feel invisible inside their own family, like this video and subscribe for more family drama stories that speak straight to the heart. My name is Margaret Collins, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 70 years old, a retired baker living in Austin, Texas. I've been a widow for 15 years, and my children Ryan and Melissa are the center of my world. Or at least, they used to be. When Melissa announced her wedding, I thought I was giving her the greatest gift a mother could offer, a handmade feast filled with love. I didn't know that behind her perfect smile, she was already planning to use me in the cruelest way possible. When people talk about family, they often use words like unconditional love, warmth, and sacrifice. But they never mention the quiet ache that builds up after years of being taken for granted. My name is Margaret Collins, though everyone calls me Maggie. I am 70 years old, a retired baker, and a widow who has spent more than half her life inside the same cozy kitchen in Austin, Texas. For as long as I can remember, that kitchen has been my world, the place where I mixed dough, wiped tears, and served love in the form of pies and casseroles. When my husband, Frank, passed away 15 years ago, I thought my world had ended. But life goes on, even when you are certain it cannot. My children, Ryan and Melissa, became the reason I got out of bed each morning. Ryan, my oldest, was the quiet one, a gentle man who worked as an engineer and called me every Sunday just to check in. Melissa, my youngest, was full of light. She had a laugh that filled the house and a confidence I sometimes envied. People used to say she took after me. Maybe that was true once. After Frank died, I threw myself into baking. I filled orders for weddings, birthdays, and church gatherings. The neighbors called me Grandma Maggie, the Pie Queen. It gave me purpose, and in a way, it kept me connected to Frank. He always loved the smell of fresh bread in the morning. The scent of yeast and sugar still made me feel like he was nearby, watching from somewhere I could not see. Ryan got married and moved to Dallas. Melissa stayed in Austin, visiting often with her new boyfriend, Ethan. He was a polite young man, the kind who still said please and thank you. I liked him immediately. When Melissa told me he had proposed, my eyes filled with tears. It was not just pride, it was relief. I wanted her to have the happiness I had once known. "Mom, we're getting married next spring," she said, beaming, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light in my kitchen. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," I said, hugging her tight. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." I meant it. I meant every word. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of excitement. Melissa showed me dress ideas, floral arrangements, and Pinterest boards filled with fairy lights and rustic decorations. She had that modern Southern charm, a mix of confidence and sweetness that made people want to be around her. I felt lucky that she still came to me for advice. One evening, over coffee and a slice of lemon pie, she mentioned how expensive everything was turning out to be. "Mom, even the catering alone costs almost $15,000. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, you know I used to cater events for years. Let me handle the food. It will be my wedding gift to you and Ethan." Her eyes widened. "Mom, that's too much work. You can't possibly cook for 100 people. "Of course I can," I said, laughing softly. "It'll save you money, and it'll mean something. Every bite will be made with love. That's what weddings are about, right?" She hesitated, but I could see the relief in her face. "If you're sure," she said finally. "You always know how to make things special." I smiled. "I'll start planning tomorrow." From that moment, My days had a new rhythm. Every morning, I woke up early, brewed a pot of coffee, and spread my recipe notebooks across the table. I wanted this to be perfect. I spent hours testing sauces, comparing spices, and sketching out a menu that would make people remember the meal for years. Ryan came by one weekend with his wife and the kids. "Mom, you don't have to do all this yourself," he said, watching me roll pastry dough. "Don't worry," I told him. "It keeps me young." He smiled, but there was concern in his eyes. "You've always given everything to this family. That's what mothers do," I said without thinking. He nodded, but his silence afterward stayed with me longer than I expected. By February, I had nearly everything planned. Chicken marsala, shrimp cocktail, roasted vegetables, a 6-tier vanilla cake with buttercream frosting. I even tested out different appetizer trays with Susan, my best friend since high school. She was the kind of woman who said exactly what she thought. "Maggie, you're spoiling them," she said one afternoon, tasting my chocolate mousse. "If I were you, I'd make them hire a caterer and call it a day." I laughed, waving her off. "You don't understand. Melissa's my baby. I want her wedding to be perfect." Susan gave me that look, the one that said she'd seen this story before. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "Promise you'll let them handle at least something." "I promise," I said, though deep down I knew I wouldn't. The truth was, I needed to feel useful. After Frank died, there were days when the silence in this house felt unbearable. Working on the wedding gave me purpose. Every list I wrote, every dish I tested, felt like proof that I still mattered. Melissa visited often during those months. She'd sit on the counter, scrolling through her phone while I cooked. "Mom, can you make that spinach dip you used to make for Ryan's birthdays?" she asked once. I grinned. "Of course. That was your dad's favorite too." She smiled faintly but didn't say much. I brushed off her distracted tone. Brides were always stressed, I told myself. She had a lot on her plate. Still, sometimes I caught glimpses of something in her eyes, a flicker of impatience, a sigh when I talked too much about the menu. I ignored it. Love makes you blind in more ways than one. The night before my 71st birthday, she came over with Ethan. They brought flowers and a card. We had dinner together, laughing over old stories. For a moment, everything felt exactly like it used to be. Warm, safe, familiar. "Mom," Melissa said as we cleared the table, "Ethan and I are so lucky to have you. You've done so much already." Her words made me glow with pride. "You two are my joy. I just want to see you happy." When they left, I stood by the window watching their car disappear into the night. The moonlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. Maybe this wedding would be the bridge that brought us all closer again. I didn't know it yet, but that same kitchen, my safe little world, would soon become the place where everything changed. The laughter, the recipes, the dreams I poured into every dish would soon be tested by a truth I never saw coming. And all it would take was one overheard conversation to shatter everything I thought I knew about my daughter. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of urgency, the kind that doesn't let you rest until you know the truth. I hadn't slept more than a few hours, and my eyes were swollen, but I couldn't sit still. I needed to see how much damage Trish had really done. I grabbed my coat, my purse, and drove to the bank. The same bank where Albert had worked for over 30 years. The same place where the tellers still smiled at me out of habit. When I walked in, the scent of polished wood and coffee hit me like a memory. Albert's photo still hung on the employee wall, smiling in his navy blue suit. He had been proud of this place, and now, walking in there to face what his daughter had done, felt like walking into a crime scene. The manager, a man in his 40s named Daniel, came out to greet me. He had known Albert well. "Mrs. Collins," he said gently, "I wasn't expecting to see you. How are you holding up?" "I need to check my accounts," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "All of them." He hesitated for a moment, then motioned for me to follow him to his office. I could tell from his eyes that he already knew something. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Collins, your daughter was here yesterday. She presented the power of attorney you signed and withdrew nearly everything. Legally, we couldn't stop her." For a second, I didn't understand the words. They didn't make sense. "Everything?" I whispered. He nodded. "I'm afraid so." My hands went cold. The room tilted for a moment. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air that wasn't there. Albert had trusted me to protect our life's work, and I had handed it away with one careless signature. I stood up, clutching the edge of his desk to steady myself. "Thank you, Daniel," I said softly, though the words scraped my throat. "You've been kind." When I stepped out into the sunlight, it felt cruelly bright, like the world was mocking me for still existing. That afternoon, I went to a small law office recommended by my neighbor Helen. The young attorney, Andrew Keller, looked barely 30. His smile was professional but distant. I told him everything. How Trish had manipulated me. How she'd used my grief against me. He listened quietly, taking notes, and then leaned back with a sigh. "Mrs. Collins, I'm sorry. The documents you signed gave her full authority. Unless we can prove you were mentally incompetent or deceived, she acted within her rights." "Within her rights?" I repeated, stunned. "She stole from me." "Legally," he said, "she didn't. I'm afraid the law is not on your side in this case." The destined one won. I left his office feeling smaller than I ever had before. The world felt heavy, unkind, and merciless. On the way home, the tears finally came. I cried all the way down the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean stretching endlessly beside me. It had always been my comfort, but now it looked cold and infinite, a mirror of everything I had lost. That night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, documents, and the letter from Albert I still hadn't opened. I traced his handwriting with my finger. My heart was pounding as I finally tore it open. Inside was a note, written in his steady, deliberate penmanship. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But don't be afraid. I always knew this day might come. I've left you something to protect you. You'll find all the details in the folder beneath this letter." My hands trembled as I lifted the folder. Inside were property deeds, bank statements, and contracts, things I had never seen before. My breath caught when I read the name on one of the titles. Bayshore Apartments, Santa Barbara. Owner, Albert and Margaret Collins. My eyes widened. Bayshore Apartments, that was the building where Trish and Eddie lived. Albert had owned it the whole time. I stared at the papers, speechless. My husband, always so quiet and methodical, had planned for this. He had known that our daughter's obsession with money might one day destroy her, and he had left me a hidden lifeline. I laughed and cried all at once, overwhelmed by a mix of grief and relief. "You clever man," I whispered through my tears. The next morning, I met with Richard "Rick" Lawson, an older attorney Albert had trusted. When I showed him the documents, he nodded approvingly. "Your husband was a wise man, Mrs. Collins. These papers give you full ownership of multiple properties and accounts. You're far from broke." I blinked in disbelief. "But what do I do now?" Rick leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Your daughter believes you have nothing left. Let her believe it. Meanwhile, we'll transfer everything under your sole name and revoke her legal power. And when she returns from her cruise, she'll receive an eviction notice for that apartment." I stared at him, stunned. "You want me to evict my own daughter?" He folded his hands calmly. "Sometimes, Mrs. Collins, people need to feel the weight of their choices to understand what they've done." For the first time in days, a spark of something alive flickered inside me. Not anger, clarity. That night, I walked through the apartment with a steadiness I hadn't felt since Albert's death. I looked at his photograph and whispered, "You were right, Al. I am stronger than I think." Then I picked up my phone and began writing in my journal, the one I had started after he passed. I wrote everything down, the betrayal, the pain, the plan. When I finished, I sat back and took a deep breath. My heart still hurt, but there was something else now, purpose. Before I turned off the light, I whispered to the darkness, "This isn't revenge, it's justice." And yet, a small voice inside me trembled. Was I really ready to do this? To turn against my only child? I stared out the window, watching the waves crash against the shore, their rhythm both violent and calm. Somewhere out there, Trish and Eddie were clinking glasses on a cruise ship, celebrating their new life. But they had no idea what was waiting for them when they came home. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Someone you would have given your whole life for? If you've ever felt that kind of heartbreak, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe that justice always finds its way, like this video, and stay with me, because what comes next will make you question how far a mother's love and pain can go. That night, I lay awake, the letter from Albert resting on my chest. The moonlight slipped through the blinds, painting silver lines across the floor. Somewhere, deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of the reckoning. The next few days passed like a slow storm building in silence. I woke up every morning before sunrise, made my coffee the way Albert liked it, 2 sugars, a hint of cinnamon, and sat by the window overlooking the ocean. The waves had always calmed me, but now they sounded like whispers, urging me to move, to act. Rick called the following Monday. "Everything's moving forward," he said. "I filed the paperwork to revoke Trish's power of attorney. The assets are being transferred back to your name. Quietly, of course." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "And the apartment building?" "That's already under your name, Mrs. Collins. We'll let her find out the hard way." There was a long pause. I could hear him typing on the other end. "You know, Albert planned this with incredible foresight," he added. "He must have loved you deeply." I smiled sadly. He did. And he knew I'd need strength one day. After we hung up, I sat still for a long time. My heart felt heavy but steady. I had cried enough. Now was the time to think. I knew Trish would be home soon. The cruise was 2 weeks long. Every photo she posted online felt like a stab to the heart. There she was, posing on the deck, a glass of champagne in hand, laughing with Eddie like they hadn't just torn my world apart. Helen, my neighbor, came by often with what she called coffee gossip. She meant well. "Maggie, honey," she said one morning, "I saw Trish's photos on Facebook. She looks like she's living the dream." "Yes," I said, stirring my coffee. "She's living something, that's for sure." Helen frowned. "It's just such a shame, after all you did for her." I nodded. I didn't have the energy to explain what was happening behind the scenes. No one did. Everyone thought I was the sad old widow who'd been robbed by her daughter. And maybe for now, that was exactly who I needed to be. When people pity you, they stop paying attention. That was my advantage. Rick sent me more documents throughout the week, legal notices, revised contracts, all the tedious pieces of justice. I reviewed them carefully, signing my name where it belonged, Margaret Collins. The name Albert had always said carried quiet power. Every night, I wrote in my journal. Each entry began with the same line: "This is not revenge. This is recovery." Still, the line between the two blurred sometimes. One afternoon, I went through old photo albums. Trish at 6, missing her front teeth, holding a seashell she had found on our first day at the beach house. Trish at 12, baking with Albert in the kitchen, flour in her hair. I traced her face with my finger and whispered, "Where did you go, sweetheart?" The anger was fading into something else, sorrow mixed with determination. I didn't hate her. I just couldn't let her destroy what was left of our family. The day Rick told me the final step of the plan, I felt both fear and resolve. "When she comes back," he said, "she'll find an eviction notice on her door. The building is yours. You're within your rights." "She'll hate me for it," I murmured. "She already does," he replied gently. "But hate can't hurt you anymore. It's her turn to learn what loss feels like." That night, I stood on my balcony and watched the sunset bleed into the Pacific. I could almost hear Albert's voice beside me. "You're doing what you have to, Maggie." I whispered back, "I hope so, Al. I really hope so." A week later, Helen came knocking again. "You've been quiet lately," she said, peeking in. "You okay?" "I'm fine, Helen. Just preparing." "Preparing for what?" "For the end of something," I answered simply. She gave me a puzzled look but didn't press further. Inside, I had already begun to prepare emotionally. I rehearsed the confrontation in my head, what I would say when Trish showed up at my door, furious and confused. I imagined her face when she realized everything she thought she owned wasn't hers at all. And yet, beneath the steely resolve, a mother's heart still ached. I prayed she would understand somehow, that she would see the lesson behind the pain. Every night before bed, I read Albert's letter again. His words had become my anchor. "You're stronger than you think, my love, and one day, you'll prove it." It was as if he had known exactly what would happen, as if he could see this moment before it arrived. When I told Rick about the letter, he said quietly, "Albert was a man who saw people clearly. Maybe he saw the storm long before you did." The day before Trish's return, I went to the beach house for the first time in years. I had reclaimed it legally, but emotionally, I wasn't sure it was mine again. The drive down Highway 1 was hauntingly beautiful. The sky stretched endlessly, the ocean shimmering like glass. When I arrived, the sight of the little blue cottage nearly broke me. The paint was faded, the garden overgrown, but the soul of the place was still there. I walked inside, breathing in the scent of salt and old wood. Dust floated in the sunlight. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, remembering Albert teaching Trish how to make pancakes there. I sat on the porch for hours, thinking about everything that had led to this moment, about how grief had blinded me and how love had almost destroyed me. By the time I drove home, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into the bank that day. I had been broken, but now I was rebuilding, piece by piece. That night, the phone rang. Rick again. "They're flying back tomorrow morning," he said. "The notice will be delivered by noon." I felt my heartbeat quicken. "So it begins." "Yes," he said. "Are you ready?" I looked out at the dark horizon, the waves crashing in rhythm with my thoughts. I've been ready since the day she sent that message. After I hung up, I sat in silence. I thought about all the nights I'd spent crying over her, all the times I'd defended her to Albert when he warned me about her obsession with money. He had been right. He had seen what I couldn't. As I got up to make tea, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was clarity. It was love, in its hardest form, the kind that doesn't protect but corrects. Before I went to bed, I looked at Albert's photograph one more time. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "she learns what consequences look like." And as I turned off the light, I knew the storm I had been preparing for was finally about to break. The morning they returned, the sky over Santa Barbara was gray and heavy, the kind that hinted at a storm waiting offshore. I woke early, long before the sun came up, my stomach twisted in quiet anticipation. The paperwork had been filed, the signatures completed, the notice delivered to their door. All that was left now was the confrontation. At 9 o'clock sharp, my phone buzzed. A message from Rick. "Notice confirmed. They arrived at the building an hour ago. The manager said they're both furious." I set the phone down, my heart pounding against my ribs. I tried to make tea, but my hands were shaking too much. Every sound outside felt louder than usual, a dog barking, the mail truck stopping across the street, the waves crashing somewhere in the distance. By 11:37, the doorbell rang. I didn't need to look to know it was her. When I opened the door, Trish stood there, her hair tangled from the flight, still wearing her travel clothes, eyes red and wild. Eddie loomed behind her, his jaw tight with anger, a crumpled paper in her hand. "What the hell is this?" she shouted, shoving the eviction notice against my chest. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" I looked at her calmly. "Good morning, Trish. You must be tired from your trip. Come in, let's talk." She stormed past me without waiting, her heels striking the hardwood like gunshots. Eddie followed, glaring at everything in my living room as if it had personally offended him. "There's nothing to talk about," Trish snapped. "We just got this notice saying the building belongs to you. That can't be true." I sat down in Albert's old armchair, the one he used to read his morning paper in. "It's true," I said softly. "The building was never yours. Your father bought it years ago. He left it to me." Trish blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? Dad was just a bank manager. He couldn't have owned an apartment building." "You didn't know your father as well as you thought," I said. "He was smarter than either of us realized. He knew this day might come, Trish. That's why he made sure I'd be protected." Eddie stepped forward, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous. We paid for that condo. I have paperwork." I nodded. "Yes, you do. A lease agreement. You were paying rent to a company that your father owned through a trust. That company now belongs to me." For a moment, silence filled the room. I could see it on Trish's face, disbelief melting into panic. "This isn't right," she said finally, her voice cracking. "You can't do this to your own daughter." I met her eyes, steady and unflinching. "You sold my home, Trish. You sold your father's Rolex, the one he wore every day of his life. You emptied my accounts and left me with nothing. Tell me, what exactly did you expect in return?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head stubbornly. "I made a mistake, okay? We just needed the money for the cruise. It was an opportunity." "An opportunity bought with betrayal," I said quietly. Eddie slammed his hand against the wall. "Enough of this guilt talk. We can sue you, you know. You're not the only one who can call a lawyer." I smiled faintly. "You're welcome to try, but Rick Lawson has already confirmed every document, every transfer, Everything is legal. There's nothing to contest." He froze, the fight draining from his eyes as he realized I wasn't bluffing. Trish sat down on the couch, her shoulders trembling. "Why are you doing this, Mom? You're supposed to love me." "I do," I said softly. "But love doesn't mean letting you destroy yourself. Sometimes love looks like consequences." She covered her face with her hands, her sobs muffled. For the first time, I saw something genuine beneath the anger, fear, shame, regret. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Eddie paced the room like a caged animal. "We're not leaving," he said finally. "You can't throw us out." I met his gaze, calm and deliberate. "The notice gives you 30 days. Use them wisely." Trish looked up. "You can't mean that." "I do," I said. "You have 30 days to find a new place. After that, the locks will be changed." Eddie muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Trish flinched but stayed seated. The room fell silent again. For a moment, I almost reached out to her, but I stopped myself. "Not yet." "You don't understand," she whispered. "Everything I did for us. Eddie said he had investors, plans. I thought it would help." "Help?" I repeated, my voice breaking despite myself. "You robbed me, Trish. You took the last pieces of the man who raised you, who adored you. You turned our memories into cash." She looked at the floor, tears dripping onto her hands. "I know, and I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, letting out a long breath. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But forgiveness had to wait. Finally, she stood. "What now?" "Now," I said. "You live with the consequences. You and Eddie will have to move. You'll have time to start over, figure things out. But not there. Not in that apartment." She stared at me for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Then I guess there's nothing left to say," she murmured, heading toward the door. Her voice wavered. "I hope you're happy." I wanted to tell her I wasn't, that none of this brought me peace. But the words wouldn't come. When the door closed behind her, the silence in the house was deafening. I stood there for a moment, my chest tight, the echoes of her footsteps still lingering. I walked to the window and watched the storm finally breaking over the ocean. Rain pelted the glass, wild and relentless. It felt fitting, as if the sky itself had been holding back, waiting for the moment to release everything it had been carrying. My phone buzzed again. "Rick, everything went as planned?" "Yes," I typed back. "But it doesn't feel like victory," he replied almost instantly. "Justice rarely does." I set the phone down and looked at Albert's photograph on the mantel. "Well, Al," I whispered, "it's done." But as I said the words, a strange emptiness washed over me. I had won, yes, but I had also lost something far more precious. The storm outside grew stronger, wind rattling the windows. I made myself a cup of tea, hands still trembling, and sat in Albert's chair. Somewhere deep inside, I wondered what would come next. Would Trish change? Would she learn anything from this pain? I wanted to believe there was still hope buried beneath the wreckage. When the storm finally began to quiet, I realized the house felt too big, too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it accuses. I turned off the lights and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept returning to her tear-streaked face, the tremor in her voice when she said, "You're supposed to love me." I did love her. I still did. Maybe that was the problem. And as the rain continued tapping against the window, I knew this wasn't the end. Something inside me whispered that the story between us wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Thank you for watching then on the Anywaited any of round. It is an aver within with the stared into the pleist. She agreed, I said. Eddie didn't come, but she did. He chuckled softly. You might be saving her life, you know. I'm not sure about that, I said, but maybe I'm saving what's left of our family. That night, I returned to the balcony. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the dark like tiny promises. Somewhere in the distance, the ocean hummed softly, constant and eternal. I thought of Albert again, his steady hands, his patience, his faith in people. He had always believed that everyone deserved a second chance, even when they didn't ask for it. I smiled faintly, whispering to the wind, "This one's for you, Al." But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Trish had agreed. Yes, but whether she would keep her word or truly change was another story entirely. And I wasn't sure my heart could handle another disappointment. Ham, I think I do, he said. You should go there, see it again. It might help. He was right. 2 days later, I drove down the Pacific Coast Highway toward Monterey Bay, where the house waited. The sea stretched endlessly beside me, sunlight glimmering across the waves. When I pulled into the familiar driveway, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. The little blue cottage looked tired but still beautiful, standing proud against the breeze like an old friend waiting for forgiveness. I unlocked the door, and the familiar scent hit me: salt, wood, and faint traces of Albert's cologne. The furniture was covered with sheets, the walls lined with photographs faded by time. I walked through each room, running my hand across the surfaces, remembering everything. The laughter that once filled the kitchen, Albert reading on the porch swing, Trish's 16th birthday party, when the house was bursting with music and friends. Tears came quietly, like waves breaking at low tide. I went out to the back deck. Albert had built it himself one summer, refusing to hire anyone else. "If I can build a life," he'd said, "I can build a porch." The wood creaked under my feet, but it held. Just like me, I thought, weathered but standing. I stayed there until the sun went down, the horizon painted in orange and violet. I could almost hear Albert's voice in the wind. "You're stronger than you think, Maggie." That night, I couldn't bring myself to leave. I slept in our old bed, under the quilt my mother had sewn. For the first time in months, I didn't feel haunted, just still. In the morning, I called Rick. "You were right," I said. "This house isn't gone. It's just been waiting for me." He chuckled softly. "Then maybe it's time to decide what you want to do next." "Next," I repeated, looking out at the sea. I hadn't thought that far. Revenge had given me direction, but justice had left me hollow. I needed something more than winning. I needed purpose. That night, as I walked along the beach, the idea began to form a fragile thought that grew stronger with each step. What if this didn't have to end in punishment? What if there could still be redemption? The next morning I returned to Santa Barbara and called Rick again. "I want to modify the plan," I told him. He hesitated. "In what way?" "I'm keeping the eviction, but I want to offer Trish and Eddie a chance under certain conditions." He paused. "What kind of conditions?" "Eddie has to get a real job. No more schemes or risky investments. And Trish, she'll have to do volunteer work. Somewhere she can understand what it means to be left behind. Maybe a nursing home or community center, something that forces her to look outside herself." Rick was silent for a moment, then said, "You're not just punishing them, you're trying to re-educate them." "I suppose so," I said with a tired smile. "Albert and I spoiled her. Maybe this is our last chance to fix that." "That's a generous plan, Mrs. Collins, but what if they refuse?" "Then they'll live with the consequences," I said, just like before. When I hung up, I felt lighter. For the first time since that terrible text message, my actions came from love, not anger. The next day, I wrote Trish a message. "Meet me tomorrow morning at 10. I have a proposal for you and Eddie. Bring him if you can." She didn't reply that night. I wasn't sure if she would come, but at 10:05 the next morning, my doorbell rang. Trish stood there alone. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes swollen from crying. She wore no makeup, just a plain shirt and jeans. For the first time in years, she looked young again, not the polished, ambitious woman who had sold her family's memories, but the girl I used to know. "Where's Eddie?" I asked. She lowered her eyes. "He left last night, said he's going to stay with his mother for a while. He doesn't want to see you or talk about this anymore." I nodded slowly. "Come in." She followed me to the living room and sat on the couch, her posture small and uncertain. "You said you had a proposal," she said quietly. "I do," I replied. "You'll still have to leave the apartment. That doesn't change. But I'm offering you something else, a smaller place, one of the other units I own. You can live there rent-free, but under conditions." Her eyes widened slightly. "What conditions?" "He's racked to the Troundry. Eddie needs to get a real job, and you'll volunteer at a senior care center 3 days a week." She blinked. "A senior center?" "Yes, so you can understand what it feels like to be forgotten, so you can see what happens to people who once had families but were left behind." Trish's eyes filled with tears again. "Is this punishment?" "No," I said softly. "It's a lesson. If you follow through, I'll reconsider your inheritance later, but this is the only way forward." She nodded, silent for a long moment, then whispered, "Okay, I'll do it." When she looked up, I saw something different in her gaze. Not defiance, not self-pity, something raw and genuine. Regret, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. After she left, I stood by the door, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall. The house felt different, the air lighter somehow. Rick called later that evening. "So, how did it go?" "Tinder tented." "She agreed," I said. "Eddie didn't come, but she did." He chuckled softly. "You might be saving her life, you know." "I'm not sure about that," I said, "but maybe I'm saving what's left of our family." That night, I returned to the balcony. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the dark like tiny promises. Somewhere in the distance, the ocean hummed softly, constant and eternal. I thought of Albert again, his steady hands, his patience, his faith in people. He had always believed that everyone deserved a second chance, even when they didn't ask for it. I smiled faintly, whispering to the wind, "This one's for you, Al." But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Trish had agreed, yes, but whether she would keep her word or truly change was another story entirely. And I wasn't sure my heart could handle another disappointment. The first few weeks after Trish agreed to my conditions were quiet, almost eerily so. She moved into the small apartment I had arranged for her, a modest 2-bedroom near downtown Santa Barbara, far from the ocean views she was used to. Rick handled the lease, ensuring everything was in writing. I didn't visit right away. I told myself she needed space, but deep down, I wasn't ready to see her struggle. Part of me was afraid she would fail. Another part, the mother in me, hoped this would be the beginning of something real. Rick called one afternoon to check in. "How's she doing?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "She hasn't called. Maybe that's a good sign." He chuckled. "Or maybe she's just learning what quiet feels like." 2 weeks later, I received a message from her. "Mom, I started at the senior center today. It's different. Hard, but maybe good for me. The people there are kind. Some are lonely. I'll tell you more later." I read that message a dozen times. It was short, awkward, but it was something. A few days later, I drove by the Harbor Haven Senior Center, the same place where Albert used to volunteer after retirement. I parked across the street and watched through the large glass windows. There she was, my daughter, wearing a simple beige cardigan, helping an elderly woman with her lunch tray. She wasn't smiling, not yet, but she wasn't faking either. It was a small start, but it made something inside me loosen. Weeks passed. I didn't interfere, but I kept quiet tabs on her progress through Christine Harper, the center's director and my old friend. "She's surprisingly good with the residents," Christine told me one day over coffee. At first she was stiff, like she was serving a sentence. But now she listens. She talks to them. There's this man, Mr. Orlando Alzheimer's. He barely speaks to anyone, but she sits with him, hums to him sometimes. It's sweet, really. For the first time in months, I smiled without forcing it. "Thank you, Chris. I needed to hear that." And it was last with another. The next time I saw Trish was by accident. I was leaving the grocery store when I spotted her waiting at the bus stop. She was holding a paper bag, her hair tied back, wearing jeans and sneakers. She looked tired, but there was a calmness in her I hadn't seen before. I almost drove past, but something stopped me. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" She hesitated, then nodded, climbing in quietly. The air between us was fragile, uncertain. "How's work?" I asked as we drove. She smiled faintly. "You mean volunteering? It's not as bad as I thought. The residents tell great stories. One of them used to be a jazz musician. He hums the same tune every day, and now it's stuck in my head." I chuckled softly. "That sounds familiar. Your father loved jazz." She looked down. "Yeah, I remember." For a moment, silence filled the car, not cold, just heavy with things unsaid. When I dropped her off, she turned to me before getting out. "Thanks for the ride, Mom." Simple words, but they lingered long after she left. As the months rolled on, Trish began to change in ways I hadn't expected. She started taking small jobs to cover her expenses, first at a bakery, then as a receptionist at a local clinic. Christine kept me updated, though I pretended not to ask. "She's good with people," Christine said once. "She still has pride, but there's warmth now, real warmth." One afternoon, Christine called me unexpectedly. Maggie, I have to tell you something. There was a crisis today. Mr. Orlando had a breakdown, shouting and panicking. No one could calm him down. And then Trish just sat beside him, took his hand, and started humming. Within minutes, he was quiet again. It was moving. I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened with emotion. She remembered. I whispered. What? The lullaby, I said softly. I used to sing it to her when she was little. Albert did too. That night, I sat on my balcony and cried, not out of pain this time, but something closer to relief. Maybe, just maybe, the woman I had raised was finding her way back. Trish began visiting me more often after that, sometimes to bring groceries, sometimes just to talk. She told me stories from the center about Mr. Orlando, about a lady named Olivia who refused to eat vegetables, about how she'd learned to braid one resident's hair just to make her smile. There was light in her eyes again. Not the shallow glimmer of material success, but something deeper compassion. One evening, as we shared dinner, she said quietly, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to make things right. I looked at her, feeling my eyes sting. You already are, Trish, one step at a time. And it will She nodded, swallowing hard. I'm saving money. When I have enough, I want to repay what I took from you for the house, the Rolex, everything. I shook my head. That's not necessary. It is to me, she said firmly. There was determination in her voice. For once, I didn't doubt her. Time passed, and I let myself believe that maybe redemption wasn't just possible, it was happening. But one night, months later, I got a call from Christine. Her voice was calm but serious. Maggie, I think you should come down here. It's about Trish. My heart sank. What happened? She's fine, Christine reassured me. But something happened today with one of the residents. She'll explain better herself. I'm astounded at it. When I arrived at Harbor Haven, the lights were dim. Trish was sitting alone in the recreation room, her eyes red, hands trembling slightly. Trish? I asked softly. She looked up. He died, Mom. Mr. Orlando. He was fine this morning, and then he just fell asleep and never woke up. I sat beside her, placing a hand over hers. I'm so sorry. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He was my friend. I didn't realize how much he meant to me until now. I pulled her into my arms, holding her as she cried, really cried, not out of guilt, but out of love. This is what it means to care, I whispered. It hurts, but it also heals. She nodded against my shoulder. I think I finally understand what Dad used to mean about giving more than you take. I smiled through my own tears. He'd be proud of you, sweetheart. When I left that night, I looked back and saw her sitting with one of the other residents, still holding their hand, still listening. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't doing this because of me anymore. She was doing it because it had become part of who she was. Still, as I drove home through the quiet streets, one thought lingered in my mind. Change is fragile, redemption even more so. Would it last? Would this new version of my daughter survive the tests that would surely come? As I pulled into my driveway, the ocean shimmered under the moonlight, calm for now. But somewhere beyond the horizon, I could feel another wave forming, something big, something inevitable waiting to test how strong we had really become. Spring arrived in Santa Barbara that year with a gentleness I hadn't felt in a long time. The days were warmer, the ocean calmer, and the air smelled faintly of blooming jasmine. Life seemed to move slower, softer. For the first time in years, my mornings weren't filled with dread or regret. Trish and I had begun to see each other regularly, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Every Saturday morning, she came by my apartment with coffee and fresh pastries from the bakery where she now worked. We'd sit on the balcony overlooking the sea, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes we spoke of Albert, other times of the people she cared for at Harbor Haven. She spoke often about Mr. Orlando, whose death had marked her deeply. He changed me, Mom, she said one morning, staring into her coffee. He made me realize that helping someone doesn't always fix them. Sometimes it just lets them go in peace. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's what compassion really is, Trish. It's not about control. It's about presence. Her eyes filled with quiet understanding. She was changing before my eyes, humbler, softer, stronger. The pride that once defined her had turned into something gentler, almost luminous. A few weeks later, while cleaning out old boxes from the storage closet, I found something that took my breath away, a second sealed envelope in Albert's handwriting. It was labeled, "For when our daughter finds her way back." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short letter and a property deed. Albert wrote, "My dear Maggie, if you're reading this, then Patricia has rediscovered the heart we always knew she had. Enclosed is the deed to the empty lot next to our Monterey house. Build something new there, something meaningful, something that belongs to both of you." Tears blurred the words. Even after death, Albert was still guiding us, anticipating what we would need before we even knew it. The following weekend, I showed the letter to Trish over brunch. She read it slowly, her eyes widening as she reached the last line. "Dad wanted us to build something together," she said quietly. I nodded. "Yes, something meaningful." We sat in silence for a long time, both lost in thought. Then Trish looked up, her face thoughtful but alive. "What if we built a small retreat for seniors from Harbor Haven, a place where they can spend weekends by the sea? Most of them have never even seen the ocean, Mom. Can you imagine their faces?" Her idea stunned me. I had expected her to think of something practical, maybe renting the land or selling it, but not this. "You mean like a home by the beach?" I asked. "Not exactly," she said. "More like a refuge, a place where they can rest, breathe, and remember they still matter." Her words settled deep in me. It was perfect. It was Albert all over again, compassion wrapped in practicality. We decided to call it Albert's Haven, in memory of the man who had taught us both what love and foresight meant. Over the next few months, our lives were consumed by planning. Rick helped us handle the legal details. Christine from Harbor Haven joined as an advisor, and a few of Trish's co-workers volunteered to assist. For the first time, mother and daughter worked side by side without friction. We argued, of course, about paint colors, furniture, and budgets, but our disagreements were rooted in shared passion, not resentment. I saw the determination in her, the same spark that had once led her astray, now redirected toward something good. One afternoon, as we stood on the empty lot overlooking the ocean, Trish turned to me with a wistful smile. "You know, I used to think success was about money and freedom. Now I think it's about peace, doing something that outlives you." I nodded, my throat tight. "Your father would have said the same thing." She laughed softly. He always did have a head start on wisdom. When the construction began, Trish visited the site daily after work. She talked to the builders, helped carry supplies, even learned how to sand wood for the deck. Seeing her covered in sawdust, hair tied up, laughing under the sun, it was like watching the child she used to be come back to life. Sometimes I'd just stand there quietly, watching her and whispering, "You'd be proud of her, Al. You really would." Months passed, and Albert's Haven began to take shape, a cozy, two-story retreat with wide decks facing the ocean, 6 rooms designed for comfort and accessibility, and a large communal space filled with light. Every detail carried meaning. The roses in the garden, Albert's favorite, the porch swing he once built for me, and the oak tree planted in his memory near the entrance. When the final coat of paint dried, I felt something inside me shift. Not closure exactly, but peace. The opening day came on a warm Saturday morning. We invited a handful of residents from Harbor Haven, including Mrs. Olivia, one of Trish's closest friends there. As we showed them around, laughter and gratitude filled the air. "This is beautiful," Mrs. Olivia said, her wrinkled hand brushing the doorframe. "You two built this together?" Trish smiled. "Yes, ma'am. For my dad, and for all of you." The old woman chuckled. "Then he must be smiling from heaven, darling. You can almost feel it here." That night, after everyone left, Trish and I sat on the deck, wrapped in blankets, listening to the waves. The lights from the house glowed softly behind us, and for once, silence felt comforting. "Mom," she said after a while, "I want to tell you something. I'm thinking of studying nursing, maybe even specialize in geriatric care." I turned to her, surprised but deeply moved. "Are you sure? That's a big commitment." She nodded. "I'm sure. I think it's what I'm meant to do." Pride swelled in my chest, mingled with a bittersweet ache. Albert had always believed she would find her way, and now, here she was building a life that made sense of everything we had lost. "I'll support you in any way I can," I said. She smiled. "I know you will. We're a team now." We sat there a little longer, the ocean murmuring below us, the stars bright above. When I looked at Trish's face in the moonlight, I saw not the woman who had betrayed me, but the daughter Albert and I had raised, the one who had finally come home. Still, deep down, I knew that peace never lasts forever. Life has a way of testing the things we build, both the walls and the hearts behind them. As the night deepened, a breeze carried the faint sound of waves crashing against the rocks. Trish closed her eyes and smiled, unaware that the next chapter of her life and mine was already quietly beginning. 2 years passed after the opening of Albert's Haven. In that time, everything changed again, not in a dramatic way, but quietly, like the tide reshaping the shore. Trish kept her promise. She studied nursing at night while continuing to work at Harbor Haven and manage the weekend retreats at Albert's Haven. She moved through her days with purpose, and for the first time in decades, I saw her not chasing wealth or approval, but chasing meaning. Every so often, she'd send me photos from her nursing classes, her in scrubs, her with her classmates, her holding a clipboard and smiling in that new, grounded way. I kept every picture in a small album labeled The Return. One sunny afternoon, as I sat reading on the porch, Rick called. His voice sounded unusually serious. "Maggie, I have something for you. Something from Albert." I froze. "From Albert?" "Yes. Do you remember the clause in his estate that mentioned a sealed document to be opened 5 years after his passing?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "It's been exactly 5 years. Then you should come by my office tomorrow morning," Rick said, "and bring Trish with you." The next day, Trish and I sat across from Rick as he carefully opened a large envelope sealed in wax. The sound of the tearing paper made my stomach twist. Inside were legal documents and another letter in Albert's handwriting. Rick began to read aloud. "My dear Margaret and Patricia, if you are reading this, then 5 years have passed since I left this world. I can only hope that by now the storm has calmed between you. If you have found your way back to each other, then this letter is not a farewell, it is an invitation. Years ago, I purchased a small private island off the coast of Florida, a quiet place I called Hope Island. I intended it as a sanctuary, a refuge for the soul. I want the two of you to carry that vision forward. Build something there that brings people together, the old, the young, the lost. Let it be a place where love, learning, and forgiveness grow." When Rick finished, silence filled the room. Trish and I just stared at each other. "He really never stopped planning, did he?" she whispered. "No," I said softly. "Your father always thought ahead, not just for himself, but for us." A few weeks later, we traveled to Florida to see the island. It was breathtaking, 20 acres of white sand, palm trees, and quiet coves. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of salt and wildflowers. Standing there, with the waves lapping at our feet, I felt like Albert was still with us, just out of sight, smiling. "What do you think, Mom?" Trish asked. "I think," I said, "that your father knew exactly what we needed next." We spent the next year turning Albert's dream into reality. With help from Rick and Christine, we established the Hope Island Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing healing retreats for seniors, orphans, and families recovering from loss. Trish's nursing background became invaluable. She designed wellness programs for seniors and taught young volunteers how to care for them. I oversaw the logistics, ensuring Albert's values remained at the heart of everything we built. The opening ceremony came on a golden afternoon. The sky was clear, the ocean calm. Guests gathered under white tents, doctors, volunteers, residents from Harbor Haven, and even children from a nearby orphanage. When it was time for speeches, Trish stepped onto the small stage. Her voice was steady, though I could hear the emotion trembling underneath. 5 years ago, she began, I was a very different person. I thought life was about collecting things, status, experiences. I lost everything, including my family. But because of the people who refused to give up on me, I found something far greater, the chance to give back. She looked at me then, her eyes glistening. My mother could have turned away from me forever. She didn't. She chose the harder path, the one that taught me responsibility, empathy, and forgiveness. This island is not just a dream my father had. It's a symbol of second chances for all of us. Applause rippled through the crowd. I wiped a tear from my cheek. Albert's foresight, Trish's growth, and my own hard-won peace, all of it had led to this moment. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in gold and rose, Trish joined me at the edge of the dock. We watched as waves shimmered under the fading light. "He'd be proud of us, wouldn't he?" she asked. I nodded, smiling through tears. "Yes, darling, he'd be proud, not because of what we built, but because of who we became." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know what I realized, Mom?" "What's that?" "Forgiveness isn't something you give once. It's something you live every day." I squeezed her hand. "You're right, and love is the same." The sea stretched endlessly before us, calm and endless the way peace feels when you stop running from your past. Years later, Hope Island became more than a project. It became a living legacy. Schools visited for environmental education. Seniors came to rest and heal. Families who had drifted apart found their way back to one another under the same sunsets that Albert once loved. Sometimes, when I walked the island trails alone, I could almost hear his voice in the breeze, that calm, steady tone reminding me that the greatest treasures aren't the ones we keep, but the ones we pass on. Now, as I sit here writing these words, I realize that our story, Albert's, Trish's, and mine, isn't just about loss or betrayal. It's about what happens after. It's about the courage to rebuild, to forgive, and to love again even when it hurts. Because family isn't perfect. It's fragile and complicated, but when it heals, it becomes stronger than before. So if you're listening to this story, and it touched something inside you, maybe a memory, maybe a wound, I want to remind you, it's never too late to forgive, to start over, or to make something beautiful out of the broken pieces. And if you believe, like Albert did, that love can heal even the deepest cracks, then, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel, because every week we tell stories just like this, stories that prove no matter how dark life gets, there's always a way back to the light.